welcome to MedCity's Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Arundhati Parmar. Lay people have always thought of brain health in terms of MRI, CT, and EEG, but Quantilex is a startup that wants to measure and benchmark individual brain functions against Quantilex's database of healthy brains and monitor changes over time. This can all be done under an hour and at the point of care. The company's Delphi MD system combines transcranial magnetic stimulation with EEG to actively stimulate brain networks and measure their response. The device just received FDA clearance as a de novo tool, and Penn Medicine, UCSF, and other organizations are using it. In this episode, I'm speaking with Quantilex's co-founder and CEO, Iftach Dolev. This episode is sponsored by Claritev. Claritev's healthcare technology solutions and data-driven insights improve affordability, transparency, and quality across the healthcare ecosystem.
In healthcare, data can create a sea of chaos with endless records and reports. But with Claritev, we help you bridge the gap between data and decisions. Through AI-driven analytics and insights, backed by over 40 years of industry expertise, we empower you to clearly move forward with confidence.
Welcome, Iftach, to our MedCity Pivot Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
So let's talk a little bit about Delphi MD. I understand, obviously, brain imaging tools that are out there. I understand EEG, but you guys are doing something completely different. You're trying to understand how the brain actually functions as opposed to looking at structural things. So tell me a little bit about Delphi MD, and then we'll go into details of your competition and all of that.
Yeah, sure. So maybe just to put things into perspective and understand what Delphi is all about, maybe we'll start from the beginning to how it started. So in my background, I'm a neuroscientist. And during my PhD studies, as most neuroscientists, I think, I use the most common tool used in neuroscience and specifically in physiology, which is electrophysiology. It's been around for at least 4 decades. And basically, just to explain for those who don't know what electrophysiology is is basically the idea of putting an electrode inside either a neuron cell, slice, a brain, a behaving brain, stimulating the brain and measuring the evoked potential, what's called the TEP, or what's called evoked response. Looks a bit like a wave, like an EKG. So in a way, you can call it measuring the EKG of the brain. And we'll get to this actually in a second as well, because it's really relevant for what Delphi does. Mm-hmm. So this is what I did in most of my PhD studies. And measuring this evoked potential response actually gives you a lot of information, almost all the needed information to understand brain function. And understanding brain function, you can actually understand whether the brain functions normally to its age group. What is the age of the brain? Whether it functions normally, whether it is any kind of functional and structural, but any kind of abnormality. And understanding this, you can use this platform of electrophysiology to understand any kind of effect, the effects of any kind of intervention, whether it's a drug, rehabilitation, damage to the brain. So this is basic electrophysiology. It also works as a paramedic. So, and the huge gap that exists, and I think that in neurology or brain science in general, brain health in general, there is a huge gap between our knowledge in neuroscience and what actually exists or doesn't exist when it comes to clinical care. When it comes to care, as obviously you know, there aren't many tools. So when somebody goes to the physician with complaints of, I feel like I lose my memory, I have a cognitive decline, I feel depressed. If you think about it, the brain might be the only organ that we never actually see. And we can only abnormalities when they already occur. In like 99.9% of the cases, You can only identify problems. And of course, it can be relevant for degenerative disorders like dementia, for example, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke, psychiatric disorders. We can only detect them when they are already seen as behavioral or structural or mobility abnormalities. When obviously it's well understood today that these abnormalities start years, at least 5 to 10, maybe more years before they actually have a phenotype. They can actually be seen in behavioral or cognitive changes.
Right.
The changes are physiological, functional changes, can be measured using electrophysiology. This is exactly what we had in mind, or I had in mind at that point, to bridge this gap, bringing the ability to measure electrophysiological measures in clinical practice.
Right.
And that's what Delphi is all about. Now, just to explain what is the vision behind it, just going back for a second to cardiology, now think about your brain health or your annual health assessment, getting your cardio assessment. So you get an EKG, again, going back to EKG, you do your EKG, maybe on a treadmill, measuring what's called the stress test.
Right.
Most cardiac abnormality, you can actually identify them. Brain, you don't have anything like this. So just bring me for a second, the vision of Delphi MD. The Delphi will come exactly like cardiology where EKG for cardiology. Delphi will become the brain health assessment, annual brain health assessment, to understand whether your brain functions normally or there is any kind of early abnormality that can be treated or can be prevented, maybe.
Okay. But then your company also uses this term, transcranial magnetic stimulation. So that is but then it marries it to an EEG. Is that what sort of the differentiation is between your company's products and maybe some competitors?
Yeah. So let me explain for a second how the system works.
Okay.
So the system is a combination of two technologies that has been around for a long time, of course. TMS, as you mentioned, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and EEG. Both used, approved. EEG, of course, used clinically in some cases like sleep disorders, epilepsy mostly, but is not really used in routine neurological or psychiatric clinical care for identifying early changes in brain function.
Right.
You'll explain exactly in a second why. TMS is used more in the psychiatric world for treatment of depression, OCD, things like this. While being a very powerful tool to stimulate the brain, you can actually use, and that was the concept of what we did, the same principle of magnetic stimulation, but minimize it. Do it in a very, very high resolution, focused, minimize this device, and the design an EEG, which is specifically designed to work with magnetic fields in the proximity of a TMS device, put the both of them together in one small device, a bedside tool, and Delphi is a bedside tool, very accessible to be used in any clinical setting. EEG devices are in the same device. It is controlled by the Delphi software, and that's the idea. Maybe I'll just explain that TMS and EEG by themselves, or the combination, has been around for a long time, but because combining the two for clinical use, I would say up to now, up to Delphi, was almost impossible. Very hard to combine them. You have to be an engineer in order to actually put them together in the same room. All the patients had to run a study, but it also afterwards analyze the data. It's very complex. And that was the idea, to deliver this very significant, very powerful technology to clinician in any point of care without really the need to understand how the technology works. It's a software that controls the whole process from the beginning until the report is generated in real time.
And who is going to use it? Is it a neurologist? Like if there's a referral for a person from their primary care physician, you don't expect the primary care physician to use it, do you?
No. So the device and also the indication for use, and of course, as you know, we have to be very strict here and very for use. The indication for use is for the use of a brain specialist, which means the psychiatrist can prescribe the treatment. Any technician can operate the system. Any medical technician can operate the system. The one who interpret the results of the data or the report is, of course, a neurologist or a psychiatrist.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I find this really interesting. So you are able to monitor how the brain is responding to certain stimuli, right?
Right.
And does this negate the need for something like an MRI?
So in some cases, so generally saying, it does not replace an MRI. I think today when we look at technologies, there are technologies that evaluate brain cognition, like cognitive tests, as you might know, mini mental, MoCA test, pen and paper test to evaluate cognition. Of course,
Right.
very subjective, can only detect very late stages of progression of cognitive abnormalities. And there are, of course, imaging like MRI, CT scans,
That's
very good, of course, methods, but of course, evaluate brain structure, not brain function. And again, the
Mhm.
brain, like the heart, is a functioning organ. So Delphi adds a very significant, the missing piece of the puzzle, which is very important, of course, and that's exactly what Delphi does. In some cases, of course, it will prevent an unnecessary MRI. In some cases, it will refer somebody who thinks he's completely healthy, but does have a significant abnormality to the required CT scan or an MRI. But it's a neurological psychiatric management system in a way.
So are you looking at this? I guess I'm trying to put a label on you guys. Are you looking at this as a diagnostic tool, as a early prevention tool, as a monitoring tool for to see if there's further decline? How are you sort of positioning this?
So I would say all of the above.
Okay.
Right is a tool today. It's so the indication we got from the FDA under the de novo, which is of course means that that's the first ever device that is
Right.
in market. Basically, it's a very general indication, which is great for us, meaning any brain specialist can use the system to evaluate, determine, monitor brain function. We, it enables the physician a better vision and door into the brain to improve the ability to have the right diagnosis, an improved way to give the right intervention and monitor the efficacy of any given intervention, drug, rehabilitation process, using the system, which is, of course, doesn't include any radiation, can be done in any clinical setting, even every day if the physician decides, adds a very significant part of the diagnostic or the observation assessment way to assess the brain in the level which is not available today or wasn't available up to now.
Let's talk about the cost of healthcare, right? As everyone knows, it's skyrocketing. There is a desire to, would be a capital expenditure, right? It's a physical equipment that's going to be bought by the health system or specialists that you're, specialist practice. So what is the economic argument, the value-based care argument, for lack of a better term, to have a device like this in your practice?
Yeah, so I think a very good example, as we just discussed, is the patient journey today. Somebody going to the clinic with complaint, for example, of a cognitive abnormality, has to go through from the primary care point, has to go through an early diagnosis to a certain way, which the primary care and also a neurologist doesn't have any tools in his office. So they can have a cognitive assessment. It takes a long time, of course, costs a lot of money. Generally, I would say that the process to get a neurological diagnosis today in clinical practice takes on average of 6 months. Costs $4,000 in the US to get even in the easiest or the most simple diagnosis. Yet still, even when we look at the treatment, no matter how good a treatment might be, and it might be a drug, intervention, cognitive assessment, whatever, lifestyle change, no matter how good a treatment can be, it will always be only as good as the ability to detect the disease early enough. And Delphi does exactly this. Actually, it accelerates the process. Going into the physician office with complaints of a cognitive abnormality, the physician can put a Delphi system over his head and understand whether there is any kind of abnormality. The device not only assesses the brain, but everything is compared, streamlined, compared to the age dependent of the client, of the patient, the population between the age of 50 to 75. So everything is benchmarked against a normative database that was approved and it was established by the company. So any physician can understand what's in front of him, giving him a window into the brain, understanding whether this person should be admitted immediately to an MRI or CT, whether this person complains like many people, what there is no actual abnormality. Let's monitor him. Let's tell him or her to come back next year to his annual brain health assessment. Maybe we can intervene with lifestyle changes. So the opportunity here is huge. And for me as a both entrepreneur, but also a brain scientist and neuroscientist, it's really exciting. I mean, we started this over 10 years ago, this project. And you can actually see how 10 years ago, even physicians didn't talk about brain health. Today,
Everyone does. Yep.
Wants to take care, everyone understands there is a need to take care, to be involved in your brain health, take care of brain health, manage your brain health. And Delphi is exactly the tool that is required and enables a very easy and accessible way to monitor and evaluate and assess your brain health in routine clinical care.
Let me ask you this. You said that even psychiatrists can use it. My understanding is, and I have a very, basic understanding, is that if someone is diagnosed with, clinical depression, there are physiological chemical changes in the body. Are there similar changes in brain activity?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So
No, continue. I'm sorry.
So, of course-
I will. And why is it that, today when you diagnose someone with clinical depression, is it just a paper-based test that they do, or do they actually monitor the brain and see patterns that are concerning?
So actually, that's a very good question. Psychiatry, much more than neurology does have MRI, CT scans. When it comes to psychiatry, these tools are not
Right.
really relevant because you don't see psychiatric disorders
Right.
using an MRI or CT scan. So the need there is even much, much bigger. The subjectivity in the psychiatric world is enormous. And even if you take somebody with depression, and you have a few psychiatrists, they might not all agree of exactly the same type of depression, whether it's OCD with a background of depression, very complicated, I would say
Okay.
a mess. And actually helps because it can differentiate whether the abnormality is related more to neurological abnormalities that the physician should regard, to take into consideration, should follow up on, or the complaints of, for example, people come to the clinic and we hear this all the time with complaints of depression. Depression can be actually depression, and you can see it in physiological measures of imbalance of specific areas of the brain, but it's symptom of degenerative disorder. Always a degenerative disorder like Parkinson's disease, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, one of the symptoms is depression. So is it really depression, or it's a symptom of
Right.
degenerative disorder?
Differently.
In a whole different way.
Okay,
Of
that's
course.
very interesting.
So this
I wanted to talk to you about your competitors. There are companies out there that are, using various types of devices to look at the brain. How do you compare, say, and I don't know if these are your competitors, but I did a quick search. Companies like, I think MagStim was one that I came across, and Neurosoft and Soteric Medical. How do you look at these companies, and how are you different from them?
Yeah. So generally, let's start, for example, with MagStim. MagStim is a
Yes.
TMS company. So they develop TMS devices focused on mostly treatment of psychiatric disorders, following the other TMS companies that are focused depression mainly, and then OCD and the rest of the psychiatric world. Basically TMS devices. They do not go into the diagnostic world. They don't have a combination of the technologies that we have. And our device by itself, also the TMS component, is completely different than what they do. They have, if you have seen a device of a MagStim or those companies, they are specifically for the treatment. So the coils there, the device is quite big, very expensive. Our TMS component is very small. All the device is small. The coil itself is in a size and a weight of an iPhone attached to the cap on the head, but the device itself, also the indication for you is completely different, specifically from MagStim and the other components or the other companies in the world of TMS. We are not really competitors. There are companies that I would say that generally, like Microsoft, Soterix, those companies are mostly focused on either neuromodulation with other tools like TDCS, TACS, Soterix, for example, high definition TDCS, which is a powerful tool, but they are all in the world of treatment in different ways, different modalities. It's not a magnetic stimulation here, it's transcranial current stimulation, which might be effective, but all of these are compatible, let's say, compatible devices or complementary devices to what we do, but in the treatment side. In the diagnostic side, we are still, I won't say alone, but we are quite this FDA approval clearance under the I would say generally the technologies are going in two ways today. There are companies that try to take what's available today in the diagnostic world, like MRI scans, CT scans, and try to miniaturize them to put them in the clinical office, like in the primary care office. A lot of potential, but still, it's an MRI, it's a CT scan, miniaturized, you can put it, but still the technology itself is limited by the performance of the structural imaging of the brain. Other companies are focused on in the diagnostic world of using AI ways, more lifestyle to monitor the way that you perform in your daily life through your iPhone, your Apple Watch, or things like this, to monitor behavior and then to detect early changes in behavior that can be correlated to specific degenerative disorders. But this is where most of the companies are focused. I think where we are, which is a straightforward medical device, a software and medical device, clinical use, we are, I won't say alone, but far ahead than any other company.
So, I understand that the device is already being used in, used at, Penn Medicine, University of Texas,
Right.
and UCSF. What are the different sort of applications that you're seeing in the marketplace today?
With the use of the device?
Yes.
Yeah.
How are these hospitals or health systems using your device?
Yeah. So first of all, as I mentioned before, one of the advantages is that the indication for use is quite wide, and this is exactly what we want to do today, to enable a widespread adoption of the system by any neurologist, psychiatrist, brain specialist that understand the value of evaluating brain function, monitoring. So there are centers for rehabilitation, for example, that focus on rehabilitation. UCSF, for example, focused using the device on evaluating and monitoring chronic pain in the study they run. In the Center for Brain Health in Dallas, Texas, managed by Sandy Chapman, which is one of the leading brain health key opinion leaders in the world. They're using it to monitor aging, brain aging, healthy aging, to abnormal aging, and try to improve brain health and monitor it using the device, whether there are any kind of physiological improvements in brain performance. So every center, UIC, for example, uses for evaluating evaluating acute stroke and what is the potential to rehabilitate for an acute stroke cases. So any or almost all the sites that are using the device today use it a bit differently, but all of them get this.
Are they actually deployed, or is it mainly being used in like pilots or in research?
So most of them started as research, of course, because before FDA clearance. Today, they are converted into commercial use. Some of them still continue to do research. Some of them are converted to commercial use. Some of them or new users are already on a commercial path, deployed as commercial use. In the US, of course, the majority of use, also in Europe and
then I'm assuming that there's some kind of a CPT code available, because a lot of devices may be wonderful and great, but actual adoption depends very much on whether physicians get reimbursed for their use. So I'm curious about this. What kind of codes are available?
Yeah. So I would say this is, of course, one of the most important things that we focus on now, getting and working with the payers for the reimbursement. The device or the procedure itself has its own dedicated reimbursement code. The device or the procedure got even prior to getting the FDA de novo clearance in 24 already. It's a T code, so it's still under development together with the payers to see exactly what is the coverage, who covers it, who. So it's a process still, but it can be built today. But of course, specifically with negotiation, with discussion with the payers. But there is a specific code for the procedure.
I'm curious about it. I've, heard this like, I don't know, not 5, maybe 10 years ago, that the next phase of great innovation is happening in neurostimulation. And that was 10, 15 years ago. And they were talking about how pharma companies are now going to get into this, neurostimulation market by buying companies. How do you look at how the market has evolved? Or even how the technologies have evolved.
Yeah. So I think maybe it brings us back to the beginning of the conversation when we started by saying that in science the technologies are very much evolved. We really understand how to understand the brain, how to look at the brain. Any neuroscientist understands the brain. We understand how to evaluate the brain, how to assess, how to monitor. Most of these are still not translated into clinical care because of the lack of, at the end, and I said this, and I think today specifically because of, let's say, the new anti-Alzheimer drugs, anti-amyloid drugs.
Right.
There are drugs, effective in some cases, do have a lot of controversy around them because of side effects, because of costs, things like this. And again, I think this is a very good example because things are happening. There are very good drugs today that are developed for example, Alzheimer, Lewy body dementia, encephalus, other indications that we are all also very much involved in. And I think one of the things that was missing up to now is the actually ability to understand whether a drug is effective, whether a treatment is effective. So all the pharma companies are running to develop drugs, but the missing link was still to understand who will benefit from the drug and whether this drug does something without a specific a window into the brain that can actually visualize whether the brain function changes using this drug. You can't really evaluate the efficacy of the drug. So the ability to move forward these technologies, these new drugs will always or was always limited. This is where Delphi has a lot of advantage, a lot of potential for benefiting, for example, pharma companies that develop new drugs. They can actually determine who will benefit, who should be recruited to a study, who will benefit, who should prevent taking the drug because they are at high risk of suffering from severe side effects. So again, no matter how good a treatment or a drug can be, it will always determine on the ability to determine or to detect the disease early enough and accurately. And this is exactly our vision with Delphi MD.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for spending some time with us at
Thank you.
Pivot today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.